Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and welcome to more JJK theories from you guys. Yay! So today we got a lot of JJK theories from you guys, in total of 8. 8 theories from you guys that you guys have submitted that I've picked out in order to look at and give it more evidence for and give my opinion on it, as well as just give more people the ability to see it. So without further ado, let's actually get into this. And remember, if you do want a chance to be on next episode of this, be sure to comment down your own theory, and yeah, let's get into this. Now, our first theory comes from a guy named MJ, and his theory is about Yuji and Sukuna's relationship and the potential reason as to why Sukuna might actually hate Yuji so much. Where in the comment, they specifically say that they feel like Yuji is similar to Sukuna when he was younger, willing to put his own life on the line for others, suffering because of it. This may be the reason that Sukuna changed into his selfish mindset and dislikes Yuji's mindset because it reminds him of his old self. Now, there's something I could see being very possible, especially considering Sukuna's own internal dialogue and what happened back in chapter 249, right before Yuta had arrived, and that internal dialogue that he had about Yuji and how Yuji was one of the only people, if not the only one, who could actually rival him on ideals. Furthermore, this would make a lot of sense for why Sukuna does hate Yuji, because he could represent what he could have been instead if he never went down that path, and he absolutely hates it because he also absolutely hates that weakness, and he just hates weakness in general, so he would see that as a weakness. But the fact that someone has managed to get this strong and still stand against them, even though they have the same weakness that he abandoned so long ago, it just makes a lot of sense for Sukuna. Also, because if I'm being honest about Sukuna, he really doesn't strike me as someone who doesn't like talking about his past too much or just remembering it, because he kind of answers a lot of things in very vague answers. For example, when Kashimo had asked him if he was always the strongest, he answered in a very vague way, even though in my opinion it is kind of implied Sukuna did always know the answer to that question, but the way that he answers is, I don't know, but I know I was a creepy kid. Other than that, he just doesn't really like giving much answers or talking that much about his past. So if the reason why he doesn't like talking about his past is because he hates who he used to be in the past, and he used to have this really weak mindset that ended up setting him back, it makes some sense. I can see this being the case. I can see this theory being very possible. We just don't know enough about Sukuna's backstory for me to say whether it is possible or it is not possible yet. So now we're going to move on to the next theory. Now, our next theory comes from Gabriel, someone who was in the previous episode, where their theory is not that much of a theory in their own words, but their theory is basically, was Sukuna actually serious about doing the merger? This is mainly because of the fact that Sukuna's favorite hobby is eating and not really fighting, and Sukuna would just need to kill everyone in order to start it, including their sidekick, which is Urame, which now I'm going to actually start to explain some parts of the theory. For starters, he would not need to kill Urame, because it's actually revealed through a redraw that Urame was included in that rule of people who do not need to be killed, so Urame would be able to live, but I know that's not something everybody knows about, so I hope this actually helps with that part of the question. And I'm kind of 50-50 on whether Sukuna actually does want to start the merger or not, if I'm being honest with you guys. Or, well, not 50-50, just not sure if that is Sukuna's absolute main priority, mainly because of the way that Sukuna talks about the merger. Because in my opinion, it seems more like Sukuna is actually using the idea of the merger to try and push the best out of all of these characters so we can tear them down at their absolute best, rather than him actually having focus on starting the merger itself. Which is absolutely in line for Sukuna's character, because in the same chapter he says to Yuta, if you don't kill me, everyone you want to save will die, put up a good fight now. The difference between Sukuna and Kenjaku is Sukuna is someone who lives in the present, and always tries to make the best of the present and what is happening in the now, in comparison to Kenjaku, who is someone who wants to live in the future, who wants to cause evolution and cause something that will surpass himself. Sukuna wants to see the absolute best in everybody before cutting it down, so it's more likely that Sukuna was using the threat of the mergers in order to push everybody to do their best, similar to how he made that comment to Yuta in specific to motivate him even more to try and fight against him, rather than just, you know, actually wanting to start the merger. That, and even Kusakabe comments on Sukuna not being the type of person at all to really want to start the merger, but that could also be part of the deal that Kenjaku had made with Sukuna, that Sukuna is going to need to eventually start the merger, which is probably going to happen after everybody is dead, like he says, but he wants to get the fun out of everyone first before even thinking about starting the merger. So while I do think there is a likely possibility that Sukuna does actually want to start the merger, I don't think that is Sukuna's main priority. I think that's more so a back-end priority, where his main priority right now is just using the merger and the threat of the merger as a way to motivate everyone to keep trying, to keep improving, so he can keep pulling the best out of them, mainly because of the fact that Sukuna doesn't actually really want to win. What Sukuna wants to do is fight the absolute best and absolute strongest he can, which fits very, very well with his character if he is just using the merger as a way to friend everybody to make them do their best. I don't think Sukuna is just trying to push past them. I think Sukuna is trying to enjoy the fight and use the threat of the merger as a way for him to get stronger. So while I do see it being possible that Sukuna doesn't actually want to start the merger, mainly because I also just think the merger would be something really, really boring for Sukuna in comparison, because it would end the potential of Japanese people and potential of what they could end up awakening in general. However, I could see it being possible Sukuna does want to fight the merger. So this theory is decent in my opinion. Now, our next theory comes from S11 Ramson, and they actually have two theories for us today. Well, their first theory is that Nobara is going to eventually end up coming back and is going to help Megumi get out after she hits Sukuna with her CT. And then the second theory is that Maki is going to end up dying when Sukuna reopens his domain to remind everyone that Sukuna's domain is capable of hitting inanimate objects. Now, I am going to cover the Maki theory first, and then I'm going to go into Nobara theory, mainly because the Nobara theory has a lot more to talk about. The Maki theory I see being very, very likely to happen, and I think a lot of people also see it being very, very likely to happen, because the moment that it was revealed why Maki is able to avoid Naoya's domain is because it effectively treats her like a building, and that's why she's able to go into Yuta's domain, and then the little bit of knowledge we have about Sukuna's domain, that it is actually able to target buildings. I think a lot of people, including myself, just take that as obvious foreshadowing that Maki is going to end up getting hit by the domain, but at the same time, this is very possible just be a red herring from Gege, and all of us to just end up being wrong and for Gege to trick us all, because we're all expecting Maki to die from Sukuna's domain, but it's possible she could end up not dying from Sukuna's domain. Now, there is no reason why Sukuna's domain would not be able to target Maki, but it is something I still want to put out there just in case it does end up actually happening. Now we're going to move on to the potential of Nobara coming back, and Nobara coming back I'm kind of 50-50 on with everything that has been established in recent JJK. Now that we know it is possible to heal off soul damage if you are aware of the soul, it could be possible that Yuji might be able to heal Nobara's soul. Now, I will say I do think Nobara's eye is just gone forever, because the way that Mahito's technique works is he reshapes the soul, he doesn't actually destroy that part of the soul, so Nobara is just permanently, well, no longer having an eye. However, I do think it could be possible that Yuji could end up healing that part of her body and making it so she no longer needs that part of her body in order to live and still work. It's just Nobara wouldn't have an eye anymore, which is kind of sad, but at the same time, it is what it is, womp womp. The other possible issue with me is, has Nobara actually been able to be kept stable and alive for long enough to be able to have that actually happen up to this point or not, which I'm not entirely sure of, because a lot of time has actually passed since what happened to Nobara happened. Around a month or so has passed, so I'm not entirely sure it's possible, but it could be possible that Gege ends up bringing Nobara back. After all, if they brought back Miguel, it is very possible they're going to end up bringing back Nobara. Like, my main issue with it for the longest time has been, if they did bring back Nobara, we should have seen her, or at least heard her be referenced up to this point. But at this point, considering Miguel just appeared out of nowhere, out of thin air, and we didn't get any reference to him being involved, if Gege ended up bringing back Nobara, it wouldn't surprise me. Now, would I like it? I'm not 100% sure, but my answer is probably not, but I could see it being very possible that they do bring back Nobara. It's just, I think it's a little bit too late to actually bring her back, in my opinion. But it also seems like something that's completely possible for Gege to do. But if Gege does end up doing that, then oh well. Now, I will approach Nobara's return with an open mind if she does end up returning, mainly because I'm a believer that there's not really anything known as a bad idea, only bad execution. Even though I don't really like the idea of Nobara coming back, if Gege ends up executing it well and making it make sense and just making it likable, then I will give a good opinion on it, that's all I will say. Now, our next theory comes from J. Parker HGA, where their theory is basically that Yuji is going to end up consuming his fallen comrades. Where as a result of him consuming his comrades, he ends up getting a massive power boost in order to defeat Sukuna. This mainly comes from the fact that he said he'd eat anything in order to defeat Sukuna, and let's say he does this and eventually dies, he will have died surrounded by people who care about him. This especially works thanks to Higuruma's conversation with Kusakabe regarding how a curse can get stronger after death. They also say that if Yuji doesn't end up consuming them, that they are all going to end up being revived from the dead with stronger techniques, thanks to said conversation between Kusakabe and Higuruma as foreshadowing for this potentially happening in the future. It could also be potentially seen as a nice callback to Sukuna's speech towards Jogo, because the reason that Jogo was so weak was because he was focused on his identity, as noted by Sukuna, when Jogo had the potential for much more. So if Yuji ended up throwing his identity away of wanting to save others and have others be with them by instead eating them and consuming them and absorbing them into himself for more power, it would be a great callback to that speech and really show that Sukuna was absolutely right about that Yuji had no care at all about his identity and what he would end up becoming. Now, they do also say this is a crackpot theory, but at the same time, it's the crackpot theories that are always the most fun ones, especially when it comes to the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, to strengthen this theory even more, we do know it's possible for Yuji to consume cursed tools and turn those cursed tools into his own cursed energy, through both the death paintings as well as a fanbook statement from Gege himself, so that would be an interesting callback to that. Furthermore, they would also work to allow Yuji to live through his dream, where he doesn't end up dying alone or ever end up dying alone, because now he has all of his friends with him. So Yuji would be able to achieve his goal of not dying alone, because he would never be alone. Furthermore, it's very likely that they all would try to help Yuji, because we do know by being a symbiotic vessel, you become much stronger in comparison to being a non-symbiotic vessel, which is shown through Angel and Hannah. By being a symbiotic vessel, you are stronger than you are normally, because your cursed energies are pooled together and your abilities are pooled together, that type of good jazz. So this theory is something very, very possible to happen, and already works with things established because Yuji did eat the death paintings beforehand. So if he just does this with all of his friends that have already fallen, like Higuruma and maybe Gojo, this would be the best way for him to get a power, because he basically has both of their powers combined into himself. It also works very well for why Ui has been recovering all of their bodies up to this point, because this could ultimately work as their final last backup plan in an attempt to actually beat Sukuna. However, I'm not 100% sure this is the path that Gege is going to go down either, but it is still something very, very possible, and just a really good crackpot theory, so we're going on to the next theory, but still, good theory. Now, our next theory comes from No One. That's actually their name, by the way. I'm not just saying that I'm making up my own theory. Their name is legit No One, but you can see the comment on screen, so I don't know why I'm commenting about this. Anyway, on to the actual theory, where their theory mainly comes from the fact that because Hakari's technique is mainly based around probability, that it's very likely that Hakari is going to end up landing the Black Flash, likely in their battle against either Urame or Sukuna in the future, and they have the proper mindset in order to land the Black Flash. Now, I do think Hakari is actually one of the much more likely characters to land a Black Flash, but it's not because of their technique. Or, well, I do think their technique has a part to do with it, but I also think it's because of Hakari's mindset, like they bring up themselves. And something Hakari says in their battle against Charles, that Hakari brings up against Charles, that there's no such thing as luck in reality. What really exists is people who have the skill to take hold of their luck. Which that fits really, really well with the Black Flash. After all, no one can land the Black Flash at will, but people can do things to make it more likely for them to land the Black Flash. For example, getting themselves heavily in the zone, heavily focused, or heavily focused in themselves and into their true self of feeling. For example, Gojo and Yuji and Todo had all landed a Black Flash because they were heavily focused in their own specific way and only focused on their cursed energy control. Meanwhile, Mahito had landed the Black Flash because he was feeling so invigorated in himself, and same with Sukuna, who actually felt like they had something to prove, which allowed them to lock in and focus. This could be something Hakari could very easily gain, considering his mindset already and how he has a very heavy self-focused mindset. So him landing the Black Flash is something I can see happening very, very likely in his battle against Urame, if we ever actually get to see that battle continue and not just be a bunch of panels from random time to time. However, while I do think Hakari is going to land the Black Flash, I don't think he's going to master a Black Flash, but I also don't think that's what the comment is suggesting. I still think the one who is most likely to master the Black Flash is Yuji, which I have an entire video about, which is actually really old, so I might actually have to take a relook at that video and remake it in the future. That's up to you guys if you guys want to see me remake that video, but this theory about Hakari is a good theory, so now we're going to move on to the next theory. Now, our next theory comes from Madame Butterfly, where they theorize that the one who's going to end up utilizing Sukuna's true curse technique, because we haven't seen what Sukuna's true actual curse technique is, or at least the full details of what Sukuna's curse technique is. We've only really seen Cleave and Dismantle, and we know he still has the Fire Arrow, so there's still more things about that we don't know, and that Sukuna is still holding back, according to Urame's own statement, that Yuji is going to end up being the one to pull off Sukuna's technique, which is going to make Sukuna pissed off enough to use his technique in return. Now, this theory comes from the Gojo statement at the beginning of the series that we all know about the potential of Yuji eventually awakening Sukuna's curse technique, so this is likely in fruition to that, and this eventually happening since Yuji is also soaked in Sukuna's curse energy as stated by Shoko, but we still don't know what the result of that is going to be or how this is going to play into this fight, but we do know for a fact it is going to play into this fight because of the fact that Gege isn't going to just establish the fact that Yuji is soaked in Sukuna's curse energy for no reason, stacked out with the buildup we already have from all the way back then, again of Yuji eventually getting the possibility of awakening Sukuna's curse technique, so it could be in a moment of desperation that Yuji does end up using Sukuna's curse technique, and if he does end up doing that, that would probably piss Sukuna off a lot, purely because of how much he hates Yuji. The main reason why it would piss him off is because of how much he hates Yuji, so I think a lot of people would be cool with this, I would be cool with this, but at the same time, I feel like he would have used it at this point by now. But also, to be fair, we've only seen him use a little bit of blood manipulation through the supernova, so he might have access to more blood manipulation as well that he still has yet to use. That's all for the future to be able to tell, so I do think this is a good theory. Now, our next theory comes from JJK Chapter, where they actually have two theories, where their first theory is about the potential of Yuji getting a new form in terms of the soul, similar to how Mahito was able to awaken his own type of soul-based ability, where Yuji, through the knowledge of this soul, becomes this perfect representation of the combination of Jujutsu and the soul, using things like Mahito as a base establishment as well as his curse technique in order to create this armor in order to fight against Sukuna, who's just the perfection of Jujutsu, while Yuji turns himself into the perfection of soul in Jujutsu. Where they actually have 4 reasons for why this is likely to happen. Their first reason is because Mahito and Yuji are both the same thematically, so if one got a new soul form, then the second one will get it to make this point stronger, which that also makes sense considering Yuji keeps using foundations he had learned from his battle against Mahito about striking the soul, but now he's just specifically targeting the barrier itself, which means he should also be able to strike the soul and be even more aware of the soul, so if he has awakened his soul even more, that would make sense. His second argument is because of how his arms currently look in the manga, so if they were changed into the hands of that into his true form, it would work really well with Yuji's title. Now, their third reason is something I don't actually agree with that much, is because of Yuji was being built to be Sukuna's perfect vessel, which that I agree with, but the thing I don't agree with is because they say Yuji was made to have at least 75% of Sukuna's power. That is something I don't really agree with, unless you mean that after Yuji had eaten 15 fingers of Sukuna's power, and that is the Sukuna energy that Yuji is currently soaked in, the equivalent of 15 fingers worth of that power. And that is what you mean by him having 75% of his power, which that is a maybe. We don't know how much of Sukuna's curse energy he is soaked in. He might actually be soaked in more than that or less than that. We don't really know. And their fourth reason is because of the fact that Sukuna had already transformed into this non-human yet still human-like appearance thing, where he has 4 arms and 2 mouths as his true form, so Yuji getting a similar type of transformation should be possible considering Sukuna doesn't really have a soul manipulation-based CT, yet he was still able to manipulate his soul into this type of transformation. And then their final fifth reason, yeah, I kinda can't read, is that Yuji is Sukuna's only weakness. A person that can hurt Sukuna's soul is his weakness. Now, for the longest time, I have been on board, and I still am on board, with the potential of Yuji getting a soul form and that being his true final form in order to battle against Sukuna. I just think he needs to be pushed into it in a similar way to how Mahito needed to be pushed into it, into unlocking the core of his soul, which happened after Mahito had landed 2 black flashes. So if Yuji were to land 2 black flashes with his current knowledge about the soul, it could be very possible for him to push himself into doing something similar to Mahito, unlocking the full potential of his true form of his soul in order to battle against Sukuna. Maybe 2 black flashes, maybe more black flashes, maybe even 1 black flash, we don't know, but I think he does need to land a black flash in order to awaken that soul form in a similar way to how Mahito needed to land the black flashes to do it. Stack that with the importance of the soul that has always existed in Jujutsu Kaisen, where if one is aware of the soul enough, they can become extremely powerful, as shown with Mahito, the soul having a lot to do with the body. As I speculate, that's the reason why Yuji is so strong, is because of the fact that he has an extremely strong soul, one strong enough to suppress even 15 fingers worth of Sukuna's power, even all 20 fingers worth of Sukuna's power, so long as they were fed to him at separate times, and that Sukuna would only be able to take control of his body for a little bit of time if all 20 were fed into him. That Yuji has an extremely powerful soul, and if he can manifest the full power of that soul, it should allow him to stand somewhat of a chance. So if this happens in the future, where Sukuna ends up pushing him into it in a similar way to how Mahito was pushed into it in order to awaken, I could see this being something that could happen. As now we're going to move on to their second theory, which is a lot smaller and one I completely agree with, where they send out Kusakabe and Miguel to stall time for everyone to just make sure everyone is healed so they can help out the rest of them in order to just jump Sukuna. So maybe that could be happening, I'm not entirely sure. But either way, good theories for the both of them. I really like both of these theories, good job. And that was all the theories we had gotten for this episode. If you guys didn't see your theories, then maybe they have the potential of appearing in the next episode, or maybe even getting a solo vid that's in the production right now. Because I know there are a few theories that were supposed to be in this episode, but were a little too long, so I ended up making them their own solo vid, which you guys might end up seeing in the future. So, thank you all for submitting your theories. Hope you all have a good day. Peace out. I'm gonna see y'all later. Bye.